talk all ancient creatures, great and small, Greco and Roman. A new book by UVM Classics Professor teaches readers how to care about animals. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Jolie Whitney. According to a recent study by Forbes Advisor, 66% of U.S. households own a pet. That's 86.9 million homes. The study found that that percentage of pet owners has spiked over the last 3 decades. Dogs and cats top the list of most owned pets, with fish a distant third. But the report is mum on snails, wolves, octopi, and elephants, all animals which show up in one work or another in the works of our guests today. Mark D. Usher is a UVM Classics professor, a self-described hardscrabble farmer, and the author of pocket-sized guides of ancient wisdom for Princeton Press, How to Be a Farmer, an ancient guide to life on the land, and How to Say No, an ancient guide to the art of cynicism. Welcome back across the fence, Mark.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So you've talked about farming and, of course, cynicism, as we just mentioned. What made you decide to foray into animals?
Well, in both farming and cynicism, animals play a large role. Farming, it's obvious. You've got your domesticated livestock. I'm a farmer, so we raise those, but also the wild critters that inhabit farms as well, like coyotes and fisher cats and raccoons and whatever else. So the farming piece already had animals in it, and the cynicism piece also has animals, because the cynics always made an appeal to living according to nature, and they used animals as kind of like a sounding board for maybe how we should, human animals, behave in the world. So they're always appealing to the behavior of animals as not so much a model, but like a standard. Animals living within their means, humans should live within their means. So it just was a natural segue to having a volume about animals themselves.
Sure, the common denominator there.
Exactly.
And you write in your introduction that animals are all the rage these days, but also that people have become more and more distant from nature. Do you think those are inherently contradictory?
Actually, I think they're related to one another. You mentioned pets at the on the outtake at the beginning of the show, and pets are sort of a symptom of our alienation from nature. Not necessarily a bad one, but because we have become more distanced from living close to the natural world, animals included, we compensate for that by having them around us as pets. Zoos is another kind of reflex of that phenomenon. So people who have pets are probably yearning to be closer to nature, and they're doing what they can to do that.
And you just mentioned zoos, and we've already spoken a little bit about pets, but looking back at Aesop's fables, which have been recorded back to the 600 BCE, of course, and you even mentioned that they were being translated by Socrates when he was killed by the Athenians, right. And that goes into more of the foxes and the geese and the wolves. Right. And how did those kind of animals factor in?
Yeah, I mean, Aesop, for instance, looked to animals as a way to illustrate human behavior. And again, that's an interesting kind of distancing effect. It's like ascribing to animals human behavior, anthropomorphizing them in a way to kind of safely or effectively talk about human foibles and mishaps and misbehaviors. And so that's pretty much what Aesop's fables are all about. They use animals, again, in a different way as a sounding board for human behavior. So yeah, I've got a lot of Aesop's fables in the book for that reason. They're always popular.
And do you have a personal favorite?
Geez, the pickings are so rich. I think I would say there's one in there called the Donkey and the Little Dog, and it's about a farmer who has a pet, a little dog, and the dog comes in to the house and sits on the master's lap and gets little scraps from the table and is treated specially, whereas the donkey, a beast of burden, is tied outside the farmhouse and eats hay and doesn't get to come in when it's cold. And the donkey says, I really want to be like the little dog, and decides he's going to make a splash and enters the house and jumps up on the lap of the master just like the little dog does, and it doesn't go well. The donkey's driven out with sticks and banished forever from the house. But it's kind of the moral of the story is sort of, you got to know your place. Everyone has a place on a farm or in life or anywhere, and poor donkey, but it doesn't belong in the house. We
Absolutely.
have donkeys on our farm, and they would be on our laps in the house if they could be. Believe me.
But you also, they're not coming
Oh,
in.
they can't. But we have a dog.
Sure, absolutely.
And he's in there.
Yeah, so a lot of your work definitely reflects what your day-to-day life looks like.
Absolutely. Yeah. How can it not? Keeps life interesting.
Sure, and let's talk about an animal that you might not have on your farm, octopus.
Oh yeah.
And of course you work with Theognis, is that right? Am I saying that all right?
Say it again. Theognis. Yeah,
Perfect, thank you.
Yes.
And can you tell me what they have to say about octopi?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've seen that Netflix hit My Octopus Teacher.
I haven't, but I mean, I of course heard about it.
Yeah, this guy, Craig Foster, goes down in the South African kelp forest for a whole year every day to visit this octopus and observes her behavior and interacts with her in really quite remarkable ways. The filmography is incredible. One of the things that the octopus does is that it'll cling to a rock, or it'll go into its den, and it will change its color to adapt to its environment. And Theognis uses this in a poem that I translate in the book as a metaphor or analogy for how human beings need to adjust the ways that they interact socially with other human beings, the way the octopus does to its environment. Now, what's really interesting about this passage, it's a poem, it's a simple analogy, but the word that is used, athos, to describe the octopus's environment, athos, is the same word that our word ethics comes from. So the idea that the octopus is interacting appropriately with its environment, just as humans need to interact appropriately with their environments, ethics is a really interesting comparison, and Theognis is inviting us to look to animals as a model or as an example for how we as humans, the human animal, can live.
So it's definitely not just stories about like fun fables about animals. There's always something else.
No, there's a good dose of philosophy in here too. Yes,
absolutely. And so you've also translated. We've talked about Homer and Ovid as well, but you translate, I believe, Porphyry.
Yep.
And who is he?
So Porphyry was a philosopher in the Platonist tradition. So he was a Platonist. He was a scholar and a philosopher, a little bit of a kind of a mystic. In antiquity, philosophy was a way of life. It wasn't just an academic, topic of study. So he took it quite seriously. And he wrote perhaps what is the first treatise in the Western tradition on vegetarianism. And he argued that we shouldn't kill animals and we shouldn't eat them. And of course, in the ancient times, there were animal sacrifices were part and parcel of religion. So for him to say that was really quite bold for its time. We don't have those anymore for the most part, though we do still eat animals. Some of us do. So it was a very pointed argument that he makes, and he says that we should treat animals with justice in the same way that we treat human beings justly. They deserve our respect, and do no harm should be the principle that we accord with when we interact with them.
Absolutely, and you actually have an excerpt from him that you've prepared today. Do you mind reading Porphyry and then reading it in Greek and then telling us what it translates to?
Sure, let me read it in English first.
Okay, great.
It's just a simple sentence, but I think it sums up his whole argument in this treatise. Justice lies in the principle of abstaining and of harmlessness towards everything that does no harm itself. And in Greek, that is heide dikaiasune en toi affectiktoi kai ablabe ketai pantos hotu un tu me balaptontos. So justice lies in the principle of abstaining and of harmlessness toward everything that does no harm itself.
And that's just one sentence, and we were speaking about this a little bit before the taping, but a lot of the time translations will be a little bit headier. There's a lot packed into each sentence. Can you kind of speak to that relationship? Were they speaking like that?
Yeah, translating from Greek and Latin is a challenge. I mean, it's what I do for a living, so it's not so much of a challenge for me. I'm paid to do it. It's my job. But to make ancient thought and language accessible to modern audiences, I think, is an important part of this job. So it's always about choosing words that you're translating ideas. You're not really just translating words, and I think that's important to keep in mind. And it's been a kind of a liberating thing for me as I try to translate. I'm not just trying to represent each word because it would sound like gibberish. It wouldn't be interesting. Trying to convey what the author is trying to convey.
Sure, so there's some creative license there when you're translating?
Yeah, I mean, within reason, you need to, as you know, as a Latin student, you need to do justice to the text itself. But yes, there is some creative license, and I find there's a lot of creativity in translation. Absolutely.
And you were talking about modern day, but even back in the day, Greeks wouldn't necessarily be reading Porphyry. Can you tell me about that kind of relationship between like the more elevated texts?
Yeah, so writing in antiquity was always much more of a performance or like a formal affair. We kind of take it for granted, but writing was on the whole kind of a new thing for them, a newer thing, and a special occasion, and an expensive process too, right? So you had to get it right, and you didn't waste words, and you were careful about the structures of your sentences. So there's a formality to ancient literature, whether it be poetry or prose, that modern newspaper language, doesn't convey these days. So that makes it a challenge for modern readers. But again, all the more reason why it's important for translators to develop it and make it palatable.
Sure. And of course, Latin and Greek is a huge part of your life, but you also own a farm. You described yourself as a hardscrabble farmer. Can you tell us about, is it Works and Days Farm? Right.
Well, Works and Days Farm, the name I stole from Hesiod, the title of one of his poems about farming. And we have sheep, we have Scottish Highland cattle, we have chickens. Who doesn't have chickens? We have 2 donkeys named Turks and Caicos. Yeah, and it keeps us busy. My wife has a big flower garden and a small business related to that. So yeah, we keep ourselves busy with farming. I'm glad I have a day job.
Absolutely.
But I'm also happy for the lifestyle benefits that farming provides.
And it sounds like it keeps you close to your work in a lot of ways.
It is, and it's funny, those two definitely intersect, and I'm glad they do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It was great to be here. Thanks.
How to Care About Animals, published by Princeton Press, is available wherever you get your books. Our advice, as always, is to visit with your local librarian to talk about it. That wraps up our program for today. From the crew behind the scenes here at WCAX, I'm Jolie Whitney. Thank you for watching, and have a good one.